Set aside.
Set aside.
In 1976, Connecticut established one of the nation's first set-aside programs.
Setback.
Setback.
The December elections were a major setback for the party.
The team's hopes of playing in Europe suffered a setback last night.
Set piece.
Set piece.
The trial scene is a classic set piece.
Set square.
Set square.
Set.
Set.
Settee.
Settee.
Setter.
Setter.
Liz has always been a fashion setter.
Who's the question setter for the quiz night?
Setting.
Setting.
An old farmhouse in a beautiful setting.
Cyprus is the perfect setting for a beach holiday.
I've worked with children in various settings, mainly in secondary school.
Verona is best known as the setting for two of Shakespeare's plays.
The heating system was already on its highest setting. A diamond ring in a gold setting.
Settle.
Settle.
Rodman met with Krieger to try and settle the dispute over his contract.
We hope the factions will be able to settle their differences by peaceful means.
Forensic tests should settle the question of whether Bates was actually present at the scene of the crime. She finally settled with her former employers for an undisclosed sum.
They might be willing to settle out of court.
Nothing's settled yet.
It's settled then. I'll go back to the States in June. She's only 15. That settles it. We're not taking her with us. This territory was settled in the mid-1850s by German immigrants. Many Jewish people settled in the Lower East Side. Donna did not dare settle herself too comfortably into her seat in case she fell asleep. The dog settled on the grass to enjoy its bone.
A nurse settled the old man into a chair.
When the children had settled, Miss Brown gave out the new reading books.
She breathed deeply to settle her nerves.
Snow settled on the roofs.
A fly kept trying to settle on his face. The crack in the wall is caused by the ground settling.
I always settle my account in full each month.
These insurance companies take forever to settle a claim. He was able to settle with his creditors and avoid going to jail.
When it is finally settled, the Marshall estate may be worth no more than $100,000.
After her husband's death, Jackie went to the city to settle his affairs.
Did he have any enemies? Someone with an old score to settle?
Her gaze settled on a door, and she wondered what was on the other side of it.
An uneasy silence settled over the room. Depression settled over her like a heavy black cloud.
A disapproving frown settled on her face.
Georgia had taken pills to settle her stomach, but she was still throwing up every hour.
Vera settled back to enjoy the film.
Shh! Settle down, please. Now turn to page 57. When Kyle was a baby, we used to take him for rides in the car to settle him down.
They'd like to see their daughter settle down, get married, and have kids.
I sorted out my mail, then settled down to some serious work.
It's been really hectic here. When things settle down, I'll give you a call.
They want $2,500 for it, but they might settle for $2,000.
How's your new home? Are you settling in okay?
It takes a few months to settle into life at college.
They haven't settled on a name for the baby yet.
She settled a small yearly sum on each of her children.
We settled up and checked out of the hotel.
I'll settle up with the bartender, then let's go.
Settled.
Settled.
She was tired of moving around and longed for a more settled existence.
I still don't feel settled in my job.
Settlement.
Settlement.
Union leaders and company bosses will meet tomorrow in an attempt to reach a settlement. His lawyers are understood to be negotiating a settlement.
Hopes grew that a workable peace settlement might emerge.
the search for a peaceful settlement of the Northern Ireland conflict.
She got her home as part of the divorce settlement.
The company paid out over $10 million in an out-of-court settlement.
The settlement of all his debts. Wyatt had received the property in settlement of a bet.
The railway stations created new settlements.
An early Iron Age settlement.
The settlement of the American West.
Settler.
Sex bias.
Seventh.
Setter.
Settler.
Settler.
Early settlers in Australia.
Set to.
Set to.
Tom and I had a bit of a set to last night.
Set-top box.
Set-top box.
Set up.
Set up.
The traditional classroom setup.
How do I know this isn't a setup?
The IT department will assist you with installation and setup. Do you use the school darkroom? No, I've got my own setup at home.
7.
7.
The women visited cities in 7 states.
We closed the store at 7.
How old's Sam? He's 7.
Seventh.
7th.
In the 7th century.
Her 7th birthday.
I'm planning to leave on the 7th.
17.
17.
A group of 17 American military officers.
I left home when I was 17.
In the 17th century.
Her 17th birthday.
I'm planning to leave on the 17th.
7th.
70.
70.
We lost touch during the 70s.
In the early 70s, Sog Harbor was still a peaceful village.
Bill must be in his mid-70s now.
Sunny, with temperatures in the mid-70s.
Her 70th birthday.
78.
78.
Sever.
Sever.
Martin's hand was severed in the accident.
A severed rope.
The two countries severed diplomatic relations.
She had severed all contact with her ex-husband.
Several.
Several.
I visited him in Kansas several times.
Several people have volunteered to go.
The bill came to several £100.
Have you read any of his books? Yes, several.
Several of her colleagues agreed with her decision.
We had to wait several more weeks before the results arrived.
Several.
They shook hands and went their several ways.
These issues can be considered severally or as a whole.
Severance.
Severance.
The severance of diplomatic ties between the two countries.
Employees will get 2 weeks of severance pay for every year of service. Severe.
Severe.
His injuries were quite severe.
She's suffering from severe depression.
The U.S. faces severe economic problems.
The storm caused severe damage.
Drug smugglers can expect severe penalties.
The president came under severe criticism for his handling of the crisis.
The negotiations will be a severe test of his abilities.
His slightly severe expression softened.
A rather severe red brick building.
We didn't realize the severity of her illness.
Severely.
Severely.
The town was severely damaged in the war.
She's now severely disabled.
Parents don't punish their children so severely these days.
Stop behaving like a fool, she said severely.
A severely dressed woman.
Ceviche. Ceviche.
So.
So.
I learned to sew at school.
Can you sew a patch on my jeans? She sewed the two sides together. Could you sew up this hole in my trousers?
The deal should be sewn up in a week.
It looks like the Democrats have the election sewn up.
Sewage.
Sewage.
Chlorine is used in sewage treatment.
factory secretly dumped millions of gallons of raw sewage into the Ohio River.
Sewage works.
Sewage works.
Sewer.
Sewer.
Sewerage.
Sewerage.
Sewing.
Sewing.
Imogen sighed and picked up her sewing.
Sewing machine.
Sewing machine.
Sewn. Sewn.
Sex.
Sex.
All you see on TV is sex and violence these days.
They had sex in the back seat of his car.
She no longer wanted to have sex with him.
The dangers of casual sex.
Put your name and sex at the top of the form.
He found it difficult to talk to members of the opposite sex.
People of both sexes buy her records.
The organization is trying to sex up its image.
Sexagenarian. Sexagenarian.
Sex appeal.
Sex appeal.
She's young and pretty and full of sex appeal.
Sex bias. Sex bias. She has taken out a lawsuit against her employer, accusing them of sex bias.
Sex change.
Sex change.
Sex discrimination.
Sex discrimination.
She is suing the company for sex discrimination.
Sex drive.
Sex drive.
Sexed up. Sexed up.
Sex education.
Sex education.
Sexy.
Sexy.
Sexy underwear.
Don't you think he's sexy?
One of the sexiest companies in Seattle.
A sexy investment.
Sex industry.
Sex industry.
Sexism.
Sexism.
Sexism in the workplace.
Sexist.
Sexist.
Sexist attitudes.
Sexless.
Sexless.
A sexless marriage.
Sexless.
A sexless marriage.
Sex life.
Sex life.
An active and fulfilling sex life.
Sex maniac.
Sex maniac.
Sex object.
Sex object.
Sex offender.
Sex offender.
Sex organ. Sex organ. Sex shop.
Sex shop.
Sex symbol.
Sex symbol.
Hollywood's newest sex symbol.
Sextant.
Sextant.
Sextet.
Sextet.
Mozart's Sextet in B flat.
Sexting. Sexting.
Sexton.
Sexton.
Sex tourism.
Sex tourism.
Sextuplet.
Sextuplet.
Sexual.
Sexual.
A disease passed on by sexual contact.
Allegations of sexual abuse.
Her first sexual experience.
Many elderly people continue to have satisfying sexual relationships.
Sexual stereotypes.
Young people who are sexually active.
I no longer found her sexually attractive.
She had been sexually assaulted.
Sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment.
Sexual intercourse.
Sexual intercourse.
Sexuality.
Sexuality.
A study of male sexuality.
Sexualize.
Sexualize.
I worry about the fact that children are sexualized at such a young age.
Sexually transmitted disease.
Sexually transmitted disease.
Sexual orientation.
Sexual orientation.
People of different sexual orientations.
Sexual politics.
Sexual politics.
Sex worker.
Sex worker.
Sexy.
Sexy.
Sexy underwear.
Don't you think he's sexy?
One of the sexiest companies in Seattle.
A sexy investment.
SF.
SF.
SGML.
SGML.
Shh. 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 I'm trying to sleep.
Shabby.
Shabby.
Hugh's jacket was old and shabby.
A shabby little restaurant.
A shabby tramp.
A shabby trick.
Shack.
Shack.
A tin shack.
She had shacked up with some guy from Florida.
Is she shacked up with anyone?
Shackle.
Shackle.
They finally managed to throw off the shackles of communism.
Industrial progress is being shackled by massive regulations. He was blindfolded and shackled to a radiator.
Shade.
Shade.
A plant that needs a lot of shade. She was sitting in the shade of a large oak tree.
The temperature was over 90 degrees in the shade.
The shade on the lamp was slightly crooked. Strong contrasts of light and shade.
A bright shade of pink.
There is room in the Democratic Party for many shades of opinion. Matt's clothes were just a shade too big for me.
The results were a shade better than we expected.
She was a shade under 5 feet tall.
The food was horrible. Shades of school dinners.
They're planning a festival that will put all the others in the shade.
Shading her eyes, Anita scanned the horizon.
She shaded in the circles in the last 2 letters.
His impatience shaded into anger. Shading.
Shading.
He didn't understand the subtle shadings of legal language.
Shadow.
Shadow.
The long, dark shadow of an old oak tree.
It was hot, and we decided to walk in the shadow of the wall.
The room was half in shadow.
In the shadows, something moved. For years, people had been living under the shadow of communism.
The events of September the 11th cast a shadow over the celebrations.
Without a shadow of a doubt, he's the most talented player we have.
Kate grew up in the shadow of her film star sister.
Lennox seemed like a shadow of his former self.
She looked pale with deep shadows under her eyes.
Detectives shadowed him for weeks. A narrow street which was shadowed by a huge Catholic church. Shadowboxing.
Shadowboxing.
Shadow economy.
Shadow economy.
Shadowy.
Shadowy.
The shadowy figures who control international terrorist organizations.
A shadowy room.
Shady.
Shady.
A shady street.
It was nice and shady under the trees.
A shady character.
She's been involved in some shady deals.
Shaft.
Shaft.
A 300-foot elevator shaft.
A drive shaft.
I can't believe you paid that much. You got shafted.
Shag.
Shag.
Shagged.
Shagged.
Shaggy.
Shaggy.
A shaggy black beard.
A shaggy sheepskin coat.
Shaggy dog story.
Shaggy dog story.
Shag pile.
Shag pile.
Shah.
Shaw.
Shake.
Shake.
She shook him to wake him up.
Shake the bottle before you open it.
The whole house started to shake.
The car shook as it went over a bump.
She shook the sand out of her shoes.
The little boy's hand was shaking.
I could see my neighbor shaking with laughter.
What's wrong with you? You're shaking like a leaf.
I was shaking in my shoes. I thought he was going to fire me.
When asked if he wanted anything else, he just shook his head. Mark shook his head in disbelief.
He shook my hand warmly.
Wilkins shook hands with him. If we have a deal, let's shake on it.
Kerry was so shaken by the attack that she won't go out alone.
The murder shook the whole town.
His confidence was badly shaken.
Her voice was shaking as she announced the news.
Reggie's voice shook with rage. He shook his fist at the driver of the other car.
Come on, shake a leg.
Corrupt officials were shaking down local business owners.
The restructure has shaken down and staff are showing a new sense of purpose.
I can't seem to shake off this cold.
Outside investment has helped Sheridan to shake off its image as a depressed industrial town.
I think we've shaken them off.
He shook out the handkerchief and put it back in his pocket.
He'll look for bargains after the real estate market shakes out.
She was badly shaken up by the accident.
The government's plans to shake up the educational system.
Give the bottle a good shake before use.
He refused with a shake of the head.
A strawberry shake.
If I don't smoke, I get the shakes.
I'll be back in 2 shakes.
He's no great shakes as a singer.